So here's Visual Builder Cloud Service. This is, I'll talk about schedule later. Right now, this is in controlled availability. So this is the new landing page. I can always switch back to my classic applications here, right? And here I'm going to start off, we're going to create a new app. So I'm going to call this PaaS Webcast. Okay. I'm going to create this application. Okay, here we go. And so as you can see, I've got my I've created an application and it has a web app in here. I can create actually multiple web apps inside of one application. The application is a container for multiple web apps and also for mobile apps. The mobile functionality is not in the controlled availability yet. It should be coming out shortly. But this is, I would have another link here for mobile applications where I could add mobile applications. And I can see my full source view here, right? So, so unlike before where we kind of restricted your access to things, here you can see the full source view, and we'll have integration with Developer Cloud Service so that you can control this and version this via Git. You can check it out and work on large custom code sections in your developer tool of choice, and then check it back in and use Git to do parallel development between different developers. So, you know, I have my start page. I have my visual designer here. Here's an empty page, you know, so let's say I wanted to drop in a heading. All right, and we're gonna write a celebrities app. Right, so bring this down a little bit. All right, I can maybe put a horizontal rule underneath it. All right. So this should feel very familiar, you know, palette on one side, property inspector on the other. I can drop into the code at any time and see the full code of what we're doing, and we'll look at doing some edits to code in a second. I have my business objects. Anybody who was familiar with VBCS V1, this should look familiar. So I could create a department. I could create some new fields, right? So I can visually create all this. We also new in this release have a diagram that would show you the full diagram of all your relationships. It's kind of boring right now because I only have one, but you know, I can add things using this as well. And what we also have is the ability now to import business objects from an Excel file or a CSV. And so if I come down to my downloads, I went out and I got this online, this top 1,000 celebrity Twitter accounts, and I pared it down to 50 just because I added some additional information in there, and I didn't want to do it 1,000 times. So I can click through here and I can say, what do I want to call this business object? You know, I'm gonna change this name so that it's a little bit more human readable, right? And then for each of the columns in my, for each of the columns in my spreadsheet, it's going to create a field in my business object. I can choose what type I want the field to be and so forth. I can say which ones are required, you know, and there we go. And so now this will refresh, and you'll see I have my celebrity business object, got all my fields, and it has all my data in it. Okay, leave guys out. Oh, and an important thing about the celebrity business object is that it has endpoints, right? So in the past, we kind of, you know, we obscured this behind like some opaque concepts of like business objects. We never said, you know, we never had the user dealing with actual REST endpoints. Here, everything is exposed by REST. Yes, we've created a business object in the background, but we're really, the way you're going to interact with this is through the REST endpoints. So let's see how we would do that now. So if I come to main and I go back to my start page, right? So let's build out a table of celebrities. Drag a table in, and I get these quick starts here. Got two in, interesting. I'm just going to reload here. And let's just go ahead and delete that. Okay. All right. So here I have my table. I'm going to add some data. And it shows me the business objects. Whoops, not that. And in business objects, it's going to show me all of the get many REST APIs. So we annotate these REST APIs with some additional information that the design time needs, like what does this endpoint do? And then we know that if I'm populating a list or some sort of collection, I want to show endpoints that return multiple rather than REST endpoints that return a single. So I choose the endpoint, and now I come in and say, okay, which things do I want? I want Twitter handle, I want name, I want that. I can reorder these things. And when I come to the query, I could do things like pass in URI parameters and so forth. At this point, I'm just going to leave it as a default and click finish. And here I have my list of celebrities. I can click to run this, and you'll see I've got my list here. Okay. And, I can also add a create page, right? It's going to show me all of the REST endpoints for creating something. I can add my name, my fields that I want to have here. All right, and click finish. And I could also add an edit page. Do the same thing. Update celebrity, my fields. Click finish. Okay, so if we take a look here, here's our UI. If I come back to my main, I have a page flow diagram, shows all the pages. I can, from here, I can quickly edit any of these guys. I can drag things around in here. I can say, what category? I don't want this to be I don't want this to be an input field. I want this to be combo box, right? That's going to be category. And, I want to put some options in here. Musician, actor, and just a celebrity. Some people are just famous for being famous. Right. And maybe I want to put a placeholder in there, right? Let's run this, right? I can actually run this from inside here, right? I can switch this into live mode and navigate around, but I could also run this out here, and I'm going to make myself a celebrity. I have arrived. All right, I'm a celebrity, all right, and this is John J. Chickarelli 1, right? Save this, and there I am. I'm a celebrity now. Woohoo! Okay, so if I look at the code here, right? This is let's go to our start page and look at the code here. Right, this is just a standard HTML application, standard JET, and that means that I can, if I want to implement something that's not in the design time, in the drag and drop, I can just go out to the JET site. I can go to the cookbook, and I can say, well, what cool things can I do with the table, all right? Collections. What cool things can I do with the table, right? All right. So a basic table and so forth. So maybe I want to do column reordering, right? I want to be able to click something and move it around, right? So I come down here and I look and I say, this is the field that I need to do column reordering. So I can just copy that. I can come into my table, right? I can paste it in there and come back to my layout. Right, I can run this, and now I can move this thing around, right? So full two-way editing, drag and drop between things. Okay, so there's my presentation layer. We talked a little bit about that and how my HTML is working. So now let's talk about the data model. So the data model in here, this data model is being served up by some variables. So the table is bound to this service data provider, which is a JavaScript class that Jet provides. And what this does is it basically serves up data to a collection, and it handles pagination and filtering and sorting, itself. And what it does is whenever the component that this is bound to, that is bound to this, gets displayed, it automatically goes and calls the REST API, fetches the data, and populates the client-side component. So you don't have to manually configure all those REST calls. So you'll see that it's got my endpoint that it's running out to, and here's all the input parameters that I could pass in. And then once it gets that data, it has to know, how do I deal with that data, right? And so it has a type. And so if I come over to my top level configuration page for this entire web app, I can see that in types, the tool has generated these types. These are reusable, and you'll create variables of these types. And so the tool, since it knows the structure of the REST endpoint, can automatically generate, the client-side model can generate these types, right? So it knows that the REST API for getAll is going to return an array of items, and the items are going to have these things in them, right? And you'll see that, coming back to start, and all right, and you'll see that we also, so let's take a look at the, let's take a look a little bit at the actions then. So we have so we also have this selected ID, which is just a string here that is going to hold the variable of whatever I select in my list, right? So let's take a look at the events that we have here configured. So our selection event, we have an event for this that reacts to whenever the selection changes in my table, and it calls this action chain. So an action chain is just a declarative chain of actions, right, that you can configure to respond to any events. So this one just says, hey, when something's selected in the table, I want you to go change this variable assignment, and we have this visual mapper that says, okay, so that selection chain, right, that selection event has a property in it called celebrity ID, and I want to pass that and store it in my selected ID, right? Same thing with the button click, right? When I click the edit button, right? Oh, no, I don't want a new event. When I click the edit button, it's going to navigate to the celebrity chain, right? It's going to navigate to this page, and it's going to pass in this ID. If I come to my edit celebrity page, right? And I take a look at what the action chains here are. This one has a variable, right, that's getting passed in, which is a celebrity ID, and we've said that this is an input parameter. We're going to pass it on the URL, so it'll be part of the deployed URL when I deploy this app, and it's required, right? I'm going to put in a default value just so that this will render things. And then we have our client-side variable that holds the structure of both the update call, and this will be of both the get call that populates the current information from the database and the update call that's going to call out, right? So if I look at my actions and I look at what's happening when I load a celebrity, calling the REST API, right? It's passing in my celebrity ID from my page variable. That's passing it in as a query parameter, right? Then I've got a branch here. If it worked, I'm going to assign the body of what I get back, right? From that REST call, I'm going to assign it to my local page variable. Okay. And, same with the save celebrity chain, right? This one calls the API. If it's successful, it assigns the payload. It's going to call the API to update it. It's going to pass in as the body, right? Save celebrity chain. Yeah. So it's going to pass in as a request parameter. It's going to pass in the ID of which celebrity you want to be working with. And as the body, it's going to pass in my client-side model, right? So fairly simple. If, for example, I wanted to say, don't stay on this page, right, and refresh the model on this page, but instead, I want you to just navigate back, I could just do that, right, and pull it into there. And now, rather than staying on the page, once I edit something, it'll navigate back. Okay. So that's kind of a tour around what our visual designer did for us. Switch to live mode, get rid of this, right? So let's edit this. And what we're going to edit this to do is say, that maybe I want to have below this, I want to, for each of these guys, since I have their Twitter handle, why not show their tweets while we're at it, right? So now I need to create a service connection to a new Twitter API. And like we said, if this is hooked up to a service catalog, to a Fusion Applications instance, then you would see all your CRM and sales APIs and so forth here. Here I could drag in any Swagger or point to any Swagger or describe document. We're going to define this by endpoint. So let me go to the Twitter API. And what I actually want here is get tweet timelines. I'm going to use this user timeline here, right? So I'm going to go ahead and copy in the resource URL. That's my URL. I'm going to put it in here. I'm going to say I want get, and I need to provide that action hint that we talked about. What is the DT? How is the DT going to treat this? And I'm going to say it's retrieve many, right? It's served in put in my base URL already, right? I'm going to give this a name that we're going to use to refer to it. And now I'm going to come into my authentication tab. I have all these authentication methods I can use. I can use basic, not direct. I can use my Oracle Cloud account. I'm going to use my OAuth here, and I'm going to copy in a few things. Hopefully you guys won't steal my key. I'll probably reset it after this. All right. Key my client, and here is the URL that needs to be called, right, to actually get the authorization. Now in my request, right, I have a lot of query parameters that I could pass in here, and I need to define those. I'm only interested in the screen name one for this particular one, so I'm going to add this to the URL parameters. I'm going to add it here, and I'm going to say that for this application, that's going to be required. And now I need to tell so now I've kind of said, what is the request going to look like? I need to tell the design time what the response is going to look like. I could copy and paste in some example JSON here, but I can also just go to the test here. I can put in my tweet name and I can hit send, and I get a full response here. I copy that to my body, and there we go. Now the tool has a response, and now it knows, right, now it knows how to treat the payload that it's going to get back from that. So let's go in now. We're going to put in a list, right? And again, I'm going to add data. This time I'm going to come to my service connections, and I'm going to use this, right? And all I want is the time it was created and what's the text. Okay. And now this time I do need to pass in, this is mandatory, I do need to pass in a screen name, so I can go to my current page. I can go to my current page, here we go, and say I want to pass in the Twitter handle for my page model and put that in as the screen name. And there we go, all right? And this should render in, what happened? Well, what happened here is that this page is rendering my list as soon as it enters the page. And it's rendering this as soon as it enters the page. And what's happening is it's calling my Twitter API before this is loaded up. So I need to put in some information that says, don't bind this list until this is populated. So how do I do that? Well, again, I can come over to my jet, thing, and I can go, what are my binding options here? Right? And I go, if binding, that sounds like what I want, right? And right, okay, good. So how am I going to, so I take a look in here, and I go, okay, here we go. That's the syntax for the if binding. Come back into my code. And where's my list? There's my list view. And I can come in here and let me paste this in, right? And I'm going to remove this. And I'm going to say page dot variables. I have code completion here on my client model, celebrity record dot Twitter handle. So if the Twitter handle is, help if I don't make a bunch of mistakes. If the Twitter handle is not null, right? Let me close that tag out. All right. Let me reformat this so it looks pretty, right? Okay, so if that table is not null, then display it, otherwise don't. And now if I come back to my layout view, you should see, there we go, and there's the list of Katy Perry's tweets. So there's a lot more we could do. I could show you a lot more doing some other dynamic UI in here. I could show you perhaps building out a web component called a CCA or composite component, architecture component, and adding that in here like a nicely formatted component for building out tweets and so forth. But, I want to leave some time for questions, and I got a couple more slides here. So that is basically a quick tour of how you build out applications in VBCS. I'm going to skip through a bunch. Well, okay, so let's see here. So as you saw, so we really have a REST-centric programming model, right? Everything is exposed as REST APIs, custom business objects, SaaS services, and so forth. And we can consume those easily, right? And we have, and then we add additional data to it, like type information and so forth. You can also add their information about, like, how does this REST API do pagination? How does this REST API do filtering and sorting and so forth, right? So come back to my Twitter API, right? I have fields here where I could just put in a JavaScript function that would transform things for pagination and filtering and so forth, right? So I could just write some simple JavaScript that tells me how do I form the URL for when I want to paginate and so forth, right? I have my variables, right? These variables can be scoped at the application, at the page, at the chain. They can be scoped inside of flows, right? And flows are just kind of segmented pieces of functionality that go through. They can be strongly typed. They can have default values, right? They can be persisted. And we have a bunch of built-in variables like current page, user, date, etc., that you can work with. We have these actions, which are invoked from events, right? We have a bunch of the standard events in there. We have a bunch of built-in actions, right? So call REST and so forth. And we also have the ability to go in, and in the JavaScript panel, you can define your custom action, your custom functions in here. And then in the action chain, you can call module function, right? So you can hand code a bunch of JavaScript to do things that you want, and then you can use those JavaScripts to build inside the declarative editor. The components we talked about, right? Pages. So each of these pages, if I go to the source view, right? So each of these pages come into my main flow and my main pages, right? is actually composed of 3 different files. You have an HTML file, you have a JavaScript file, and a JSON file, right? So, and I can edit the source for all 3 of these. And so, again, if I come into, this is kind of a logical grouping of those 3 files. If I come in here, I can see this is my code for my HTML, this is my code for my JavaScript, and all of the declarative tooling is being stored in this JSON file, which is, here's where I have my chains, here's where I have my variables, and so forth, right? And again, all of this, we have developer cloud service in an upcoming release. We have the upcoming drop, I should say. And in the first release, we have developer cloud service integration. So this can all be put under version control, and you can have multiple developers going back and forth, pulling their changes and pushing their changes.